very rarely have the public come and attend. It's always the people who are on the actual subcommittee that attend, and that's it. And it's a shame because real decisions are made, price hikes, structures, and how to fund the unfunded liabilities that we have facing us. And we want to have public input because sometimes we don't always know exactly the right moves to make, what's right, what's wrong. We try to do the best to our ability, and obviously public input is a very important factor to that. We have multiple reports coming out. We have a school dude coming out with our building facilities. We have an asset report coming out with the water, wastewater infrastructure on the pipes and the conditions of them. So communication's key. We need to break down the barriers, and we need to be more engaged with the public, and that's something I'd like to see.
John, can I ask you a question? What is the plan? And just the folks out here, have you heard the plan, or?
Yes, I think Mayor was explaining, but it was Fund which was hired by the town to create, to consult on some of the remedies that they felt were helpful to the town, downtown.
Do we know how much money was spent on that plan?
It was a feasibility study, so it was probably at least 50,000.
I don't know the dollar sign. I don't know if you remember.
We love feasibility studies.
$50,000, something like that.
My second life is going to be a feasibility study manager.
Okay, yeah, it was a mean question. Here's an easier one. What have you learned during the campaign that surprised you about the major issues? Anybody except Sean?
Could I?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm gonna raise the name Bruni development again. So one of the things I've done recently is have a 2-hour conversation with Glenn Gibbs at his office. I meant it, my goal was to get his view of things from the planning office, strictly that. But he owned directly into the Bruni's project. My husband and I live on Fellows Road, so it's close to the Bruni's site. And I says, for instance, I'm concerned about the cut through that Lakeman's Lane will become. And I should be nice. Mr. Gibbs expressed surprise and reluctance to accept the idea that there would be any added stress on Lakeman's Lane with 350 new parking spaces at the Bruni's development. And it led to a discussion about whether there was a traffic study. So I was surprised to find that there was such a reluctance to imagine that there would be any added stress traffic-wise on Lakeman's Lane with a new development proposed at Bruni's. Again, one of these studies was put out there, a document. Mr. Gibbs said, "Have you read it?" Asked me, I said, "No, I haven't read it." I asked him if he'd read it, and I said, I pointed out, it's probably in a room across the hall. It turns out there was no traffic study done for Lakeman's Lane or Heartbreak Road. So that's something I learned.
On Sunday, I had a really eye-opening experience. I hired a babysitter and planned to spend the day knocking on doors and putting some yard signs up, and in the Neck area, maybe down in Argilla. But I decided to start off over at the Ipswich Housing Authority, and it's not just close to the election site, but I wanted to kind of get the read of the people who live there. And I spent the whole day there. I didn't end up making it to the Neck. And just talking to voters and some low-income residents and what their issues and concerns with the towns are. Some of them had some really tough stuff: mold in their bathroom, leaky pipes. Some woman showed me mushrooms that she says is growing and haven't been addressed. There's also people who love the housing authority director over there, Kate, who's new and she's being really responsive. And then I also met a guy named Edney, who's recently here from Peabody, where he was living in a shelter with his son. And there's a lot of things that are going wrong with this town, and people have a lot of gripes, but you talk to someone like Edney and you kind of forget how lucky we are to live in this absolutely magical, special place. For Edney, this is a dream come true to live here in Ipswich. And it really kind of opened my eyes that while there's a lot of things that we need to fix and move forward with, there's a lot of amazing things in Ipswich that we really need to be thankful for too. So.
I want to say I'm not terribly surprised by this, but I've been very impressed by the number of people that I've met with over the last several weeks. And a number are in this room tonight, so thank you. I feel as though many of the people who have given many years of service to the town have a very deep understanding of so many of these issues. And they're very, I'd say, humble about it. They don't go tooting their own horn about it, but we, I think, owe a debt of gratitude to many of these people who have done a lot of work. It's not to say, and I will go back to the water issue, there have been some mistakes made in the past on some issues by the town. I warned the town 15 years ago that our reservoirs did not have the yield that they claimed to have, and they ignored me. This is part of the reason I don't go to the water subcommittee meetings, is because they always ignore me when I tell them things like that. And I have also suggested to them that we could have a rate structure which was beneficial in terms of conservation measures. We have a seasonal structure, but there are other rate structures that we could consider. And I also recommended to the town several years ago that we could implement what's called a water bank, which is a measure that basically requires that developers have to offset the projected water use for their development by saving 2 gallons of water for every 1 gallon of projected use. It's the basic formula that most communities use, and it's been very successful. So I think we have room to improve there.
Anisha, what surprised me, I think when the day I went to get asked for signatures, what has surprised me is that the extent to which our the 2-school, 1-school issue for our elementary schools is still very much a live issue. Even though Ipswich is no longer on the list to get funds from the state, the issue has not been put to bed. And it is going to be something that our school board is going to have to work with. But I hope, for me, it surprised me to the extent that it was such a live issue, because I don't have elementary school children anymore. But I realize how important it is to our schools. And it is, of course, it's important to our community as to how we're going to go forward. As Michael and I know, something we've had to worry about in capital budgets is how to keep the 2 schools that we have with roofs that don't leak and toilets that flush and all the other things. And these are things we now include in the capital budget. So I'm hoping, one is I realize that this is an important issue as we go forward. It needs to be as we look at all the different facilities that we need to upgrade. But also, I hope that it's in the role of the select board is how can we help the school committee when they do present another plan, and they will need to, how can we help bring the community to a consensus, which we can all, it's something we can all agree upon.
Thank you.
Well, I think it's an injustice, Carrie, that you were ignored, because with your background expertise, I'm serious, that is not a good thing. But what have I learned? I've learned on this campaign cycle that every campaign is different depending on the times. When I ran in 2014, it was an override issue, and that was the hot topic. But it's funny, because I was trying to find out the hot topic this elective cycle, and it seems like the hot topic is a little of everything, because we have a lot of work that needs to be done in a lot of areas, between our infrastructure needs, between our utility needs, between our school needs, between our climate resiliency needs, between helping the small businesses with an influx of people coming in. And I'm always learning on the finance committee. I'm always learning about new things and new aspects and new input from when the public does show up at the meetings and citizens' queries and what have you. And Ipswich is so lucky to have such a diverse community. And I think that it's hard to narrow down on 1 or 2 or 3 particular issues, because there are so many decisions that are going to have to be made in the next 5 years that you really have to have a little of focus on all of them, or else if you put too much attention on one thing, the rest will fall behind, and vice versa. So that's probably the biggest thing that I've seen, is that sometimes it's not always a 1 or 2 or 3 issue problem. It's sometimes it's a little of all.
Okay, thank you. So, public safety, the facilities need a lot of work. There will be issues around location and funding. What are you looking for in terms of solutions? One person left.
Well, I'm first looking for the results of this study that is ongoing now to evaluate the public facilities in town and to recommend what the needs are. And I think it's important to evaluate needs versus, wants in a way. I did talk to my next door neighbor, Pat McNally, about the issue of the fire department and the needs there. Clearly there are significant needs. There was a study done some years ago regarding upgrading that building for a cost of $200,000. According to Pat, I think we need to look, well, is that completely out of date? Are there things that we need to learn from what that was done? But my basic approach will be, let's get the facts first, the information, and then let's evaluate what the alternatives are and the costs and benefits of the various alternatives. So I think that would be my process. I do think that we clearly have needs on the public safety side. On the other hand, we have, I think many of us know how important our public safety officers are to the well-being of the town. So I would be very supportive of making sure that they have the resources they need.
Okay, and full disclosure, I'm on the Public Safety Facilities Committee. I'm a proud member of it. I also work in the court systems. So I spend a lot of my time working with members of our emergency management systems. I happen to know that funds were appropriated. We did hire or retain an absolute rock star set of women who run an incredible architectural firm to do the survey. And it is almost completed. Our public safety facilities building, or whatever we're going to come forward in the final plan, is going to be something for the entire community. It is not just that we need to offer something for our police or for our firemen, but a building or a facility that's put together is something for the community. Which means, and when we do the building right, it'll have things like a community room. It'll have proper places for people who are not only defendants but for victims to be safely responded to and taken care of. It'll have public bathrooms, which I swear I could sell any building to anybody if I could say we can have public bathrooms in downtown Ipswich. I think Carrie's right. We need to wait till the final recommendations come in. And I can say that I've been very proud to be on this committee. One thing is a 13-member committee of people from all walks of life from Ipswich. And we were able to come to a unanimous decision about picking this architectural firm because they were the ones who were presented as most responsive and most interested in what our community wanted. We have been looking at the first study done to repair or replace the police station was 1953. We've had a lot of studies since then. I have great faith in the study that is almost complete, and also it is time to make a change. What we have is not safe, and it is not appropriate for our police, our fire, and our community.
Tammy has been doing a great job on that subcommittee, and she's been keeping us up to date step by step, which is very helpful. And it's a good thing that we have these subcommittees because, as I mentioned last night in our forum, none of us up here have a master plan of which project should go forward first, which project should go forward last, etc. And that's why we have these subcommittees. They're charged with doing the research that's necessary to figure out all the things that include, what we have, what we need, the lifespan of this, what needs to be addressed immediately, etc. And then they come to us, and then we decide in the finance committee the best ways to, incur the cost. Are there any grants? Are there any matching grants, standalone grants? Is there any funding on the Fed side, any funding on the state side? And then between the select board, the finance committee, the subcommittee, the public, and the school committee, we come to a decision. Now, it is an embarrassment what we have. When I ran in 2014, Chief Nickus was very nice enough to give me a tour of the police station from top to bottom, and I can tell you right now that we have evidence stored in Bud Light boxes from the bottle shop up on the second floor in drafty, rooms, which is an embarrassment. And we have the fire station that's very old, and the fact that the trucks haven't fallen through is amazing. Let's hope that doesn't happen until you guys finish your work and we figure out what we're going to do.
Fingers crossed, guys.
But it's a real issue because they're the ones we call when there's an emergency, when there's a fire, when there's a break-in, when someone broke down on the side of the road. It's just we need to make sure that these public safety officials are a priority of ours. And I'm not saying the priority, I'm not saying the last priority, but a priority. And it goes back to what I said earlier, is that we have a lot of projects coming up and we have a lot of different priorities that we have. And the one thing we have to focus on is that we have all these projects, but we have to do it in a way where we don't tax people out of their homes. And that's the biggest challenge we have.
So,
To that, I want to say, going back to the school issue, in retrospect, when I think about it, I think one reason why it was such a painful experience and continues to be is I think we were trying to solve too many problems at once. There was locating the new building, there was pitting one school against the other school. There were a lot of questions, whether keeping Ipswich central or containing it or allowing sprawl. All these questions became very heated. So thinking about the new facility for the police, the fire, all that, public safety, I would like to learn from the experience we've had with the school question and hone in on exactly the right questions and address them directly.
So I think this is kind of a microcosm for a lot of the decisions and how we approach them in Ipswich. And I think in some ways the reasons why we don't get to end solutions with these things. Everybody's in agreement that our police and fire and public safety needs to be replaced and that they're too old. The fire station was literally built for horse and buggies. The police station is in a former electric light storage area. I met with Chief Nickus a couple weeks ago. And he's amazing. He's one of the most dedicated. We're lucky to have him here. And he was telling me that we've gone through four, at least during his tenure, 4 different planning commissions on that public safety building. I don't know how much money's been spent. I know you're saying $50,000 on these plans, and but when we, I'm sure more for these architecturals. I know there's $100,000 in the community development plan. The school plans are $1 million. But when we spend all these money on plans and then we don't get public opt-in and by a 2/3 majority, and we kind of divide the town. And Mike said we don't have a master plan. We kind of go through each little thing. I think a reason it doesn't kind of pass and it doesn't go forward is because we don't know how each piece fits in the whole. So I think the chief, there's nobody better leading this. You're right. He has learned a lot. He's taught you at the site locations. They're talking to people who are kind of know on certain aspects. And he's doing a lot of engagement. But if we don't have a master plan and we bring this forward on public safety as a one-off and we don't know what we're doing with our schools, because that could affect our public safety buildings, then my huge concern is that, again, we go forward with the plan and we don't really bring the stakeholders together and we don't know how it fits into the master plan, and all that money is for naught. Time is of the essence. We cannot wait any longer. If it's not just a 4th but a 5th public safety commission that we put something forward on, we don't act on it, we're dead in the water. And Rowley's doing new stuff with their public safety buildings. Essex has one on the warrant for this town meeting, whether it passes or not. At least they're putting plans forward, and there's a decision to be made, because we can't sit by any longer while these huge infrastructure and public safety plans are just kind of sidelined.
thank you. So, what are your specific views on the town meeting zoning proposals regarding the in-town and rural residence A zoning and the parking proposal? Those are the 2 brought by Alpine.
This is referring to 2 different articles that were brought forward by Alpine. First one it looks like tightening up with the loophole. There are properties, I believe there's about 50 properties in town, in which the property, as it is put together, is both in in-town residential and rural RRA. And the loophole that has been found by some developers is that they can take they can change the densities and put a much higher density of number of units and keep it entirely in the IR section, so that you would have, and it's a calculation using the RRA. It's a loophole. I mean, it's the best way to put it. It was never the intention to say that the large, like an acre piece of property, could have the front quarter acre have a number of units on it. If we don't tighten up this loophole, we could dramatically change our high street, because people's properties go way up the hill. The back line of property could be used for changing the density calculation and allowing much higher density of buildings right on the street level. This affects houses or properties in the High Street area, the Farley Road area. There's, I believe, 50 different properties have been identified. So I'm in favor of tightening this loophole, because I think the spirit of our zoning was never to allow this to happen. And the fact that it has been found a way to make it happen doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do. The second is the issue of, it's a car issue. The way we've historically said that units, the number of parking spaces that have to be allowed per unit is saying 1.5 cars per unit, which sounds like a great way to sort of encourage people to decrease the number of vehicles they have. But in reality, what happens is these cars pour out into the street. So the recommendation is to change it to, instead of 1.5 cars, because nobody has half a car per unit in multi-unit buildings, is to change it to 2 cars per unit, so that we won't have a spillover into the street. So I'm in favor of that too, because it is a reality. Half cars don't exist.
So I'm in strong support of both articles, because I applaud Al for wanting to keep Ipswich and not have mega developments come in or change the way that Ipswich looks. And you know, my biggest concern when it comes to zoning changes and what have you is I'd like to know the impact that it has on the people that it would currently affect. And I went to the planning board meeting and I saw the attendance at the finance committee meeting warrant hearing. I wasn't able to attend because I was ill, but and there wasn't a strong public outcry. And it sounded like the planning board generally supported it, but still needed to have a few more fact-checking to do when I attended that meeting. I think, you know, when I grew up in Ipswich, and I'm still growing up in Ipswich, obviously, you know, and my kids are going to be growing up in Ipswich, I want them to see the same type of Ipswich that I saw, which was a small-knit community, a historical community, and I think the first article of the zoning helps that. And then when it comes to the parking issue, it's currently 1.5. The goal is to make it 2 to help with the very severe parking issues that we have around this part of town. With a special permit, you can get it down to 1, so it's not like it's an end-all for certain situations, but I am in support of it.
I'm also in support of both of them, but I also think it's important, I hate to sound like a broken record, but you know, to plan. I mean, we can't keep solving these things kind of one-off, piecemeal. You know, I was with Governor Baker at the regional cabinet meeting in Gloucester recently, and he's really pushing a new housing production bill. And he was talking about, you know, when you don't see, you know, when you're in communities like ours and these developers, you know, they're not producing enough sort of single-family homes to meet the demand so that we continue to attract residents to this area and meet the growth for affordable housing. And when you have the situations that we have now, you have real estate firms chasing the high end of the market and chasing the most profitable areas and looking for loopholes because they literally, if they have a town that's tough to deal with, they just put you on the list and like you're not going to get that strong stock of affordable single-family homes being built. And I really feel like that's something we see in Ipswich a lot, and we need that. You know, I know you do talk to a lot of people who don't want growth in Ipswich, but we need that new generation of families and business owners to come here because you know we're all, you know, I'm gonna age out someday, and it'll be my son, and hopefully more kids after that's turn, and beyond that. And I see it happen to communities around Massachusetts where you know things start crumbling in the infrastructure and in the schools, and you know, and people start leaving the town, and your tax base gets decimated, and you know, and your options are, you know, higher taxes for the people who are there, or you know, a lack of services. So I think this is absolutely critical, and you know, 1 or 2 40B and you know, kind of situations at a time is not going to solve that. So.
Thank you.
All right, so a couple of things come to mind. We got younger people here with young families. Hooray for that. One thing I'm thinking too, I don't know how many cars your family has, but I do know there is a trend for, well, say, the millennials who actually, I'm not in my own family and extended people, other families, younger people and millennials do not want cars. They do not have licenses. I'm not saying that's going to apply to everyone, but I think it is something to be aware of, that trends change. So to make decisions based on old trends is not probably a good idea. I just want to talk a little bit about the affordable housing question. And I've been doing research on this for quite some time, and there's any number of answers, and they're all at odds with one another. But I would say this, my personal opinion is that if you are going to have speculative building in Ipswich, then I think as the town must ask more of the developers. If these are people that are speculative and they're looking to make money from the development, they don't have the personal connection to the town, they're not too concerned about how it's going to impact the town. I think the town should ask more from them. There is the fear that those developers will then go elsewhere, but when I'm saying ask more from them, I'm saying add some more affordable housing. I think we all need to be aware, this is capitalism in action. We are a coastal town. We have a lot of attributes. The prices are going to continue to go up. It's just a reality of life. So simply building, allowing speculative builders to come in, they're going to want to build attractive houses to attract higher prices. They're not thinking about buying. Are we talking about tiny house movement, which I would support, frankly. So I could go on and on, but I won't. Okay.
Oops, excuse me.
So I want to go back to the articles proposed by Al Boynton. The one, he was very concerned about the proposed development on High Street, and that came before the Historical Commission, and I would say that the commission was unanimous in being extremely concerned about the idea of that type of dense development in the High Street area, because that is one of the most important historical streetscapes in America. It's, Ipswich, I think many of you probably know, Ipswich has more first period homes than any other community in America, and quite a few of them are on that stretch of High Street and East Street as well, and it would be really damaging to that resource to have this high density development. On the other hand, on the question of affordable housing, it's clearly something we have to reckon with and provide more clear incentives for affordable housing. I met with Glenn Gibbs yesterday and Ethan Parsons last week, and we were talking about the idea of the accessory building type, allowing accessory apartments to be built in houses that already exist, basically without changing the footprint of the house, as one avenue to get to what we need to do there. So I think that there's an opportunity, and we should be looking at more incentives for what we want to happen and more disincentives for what we don't want to happen. And on the parking, well, I recognize there's a parking issue. I think that it needs a little more thought, because what we don't want is a whole lot more paving, though. So let's think about how to do parking that isn't damaging.
Thank you. So
John, could I just, I didn't have all my time there. I just want to respond to Helen's. I have 1.5 cars. A Ford Flex station wagon with the family, and then a Jeep Wrangler 1993, which I've owned since I was 15 years old and bought after working at Wiener Central for 2 years. And that's currently at Skillman's, which is why I say half car. And I hope to have it ready for the summer, but they say I'm late June, I just when I sort of expect back. So if Skillman, anybody's from here, a little earlier than late June would be great.
So, yeah. I gave Tammy a little extra time there because she explained the situation. Here's a nice easy one. Talk to us about parking and traffic downtown.
I'll,
No, you quit.
it's like that new Jeopardy champion. You gotta do. I was practicing all of that. I think it's kind of a no-brainer for the resident lot at the train station. I have a lot of personal skin in this game because I'm walking there almost, every day as I commute to Boston, and that lot is pretty much full by the 7:40, if not the 7:12. And I like to walk, so it doesn't affect me all the time. But sometimes when it's pouring rain or snowing, or I'm a little late, I drive from my house over there, and I just assume that I'm going to have to park in those resident lots in the area, and it breaks my heart to think there's people who live there. They might as well live in South Boston and not in Ipswich, Massachusetts, because there's just car after car, and they put notes on my car, and I know it. But and I know the police chief. He showed me the study and the people, and they're continuing to update that on just how many people in Rowley who park in our spot because they have a pay lot. So they come to our free parking, and they don't pay for the roads and the schools and all the things that are in here. So I really think some mix of resident parking in that area. Although, as the chief told me, we got to worry about unintended consequences, because when we make that resident, in that area, then they're going to spill out somewhere else. But that main, I know Mike was talking about that main parking lot kind of downtown, especially for the business community. Like it has a nice, it's never full. It's really difficult to access. The chief was telling me, if you're not from Ipswich, you think it's very dangerous too, because it just has that look that you're going to get robbed, even though you could probably leave. It's Ipswich, you can leave the car open. The keys in the car, and you can't. I've tried to go over to the sports bar for Pats games in the wintertime from my house, and even I get lost, like trying to. I'm in the post office, and I go to the wrong entrance, and it's just not. We need to, kind of like Newburyport, is connect these kind of centralized parking lots to our business community and the Riverwalk, which should really go all the way around. Oh, my dad.
I want to jump on this. The parking lot behind the banks, right? Okay, there's endless problems, but I like to focus on solutions, and there are always solutions. So I say, meet that problem head on, and let's solve it. So it's again missed opportunities. Ipswich is a history of missed opportunities. So let's do something about that available parking, and find a solution. I want to talk about too the problem with the train station parking. Again, in my conversation with Glenn Gibbs, talking about, well, we're gonna have to ticket there. One thing that comes to mind is I cannot stand the idea of chasing a problem. When you're ticketing, it means it's a desperate measure. It means you've already made a mistake. It means you've failed to plan. So don't put the burden on the people that can't find a place to park. I think that's a mistake. And I mentioned, Glenn, when we have the Bruni's development, if it goes forward with 350 new parking spaces, what percentage of those 350 cars are going to want to park at the train station? And that hadn't occurred to him. And he fought off the idea that could be a problem. So I think that really puts a fine point on what we're talking about.
I think that we need to look at the option that was proposed in kind of rough form of the parking garage at the train station, but there were multiple uses originally proposed, and it was a very large structure. Some people were not pleased with the general scale and such, but I think that there is a possibility of achieving the aims in terms of the parking needs there, and there may be other benefits of doing something there. It needs some serious work to make sure that kind of it fits with the, I'm going to put in air quotes, the character of the community, but it has some potential, so I think we certainly need to look at it more closely. And in terms of the more general issues of, the downtown driving and such, we've talked with folks here about, enhancing the street crossings so that they're more visible and safer and that kind of thing. So there's some other work needed, and traffic calming type measures that have been successful in other areas. I think we need to look at those too.
A couple of things I think are important is, one is to make sure our community and people coming into a town know what parking we do have. One thing that seems to be not a really well publicized resource is that EBSCO has and does allow parking after hours, after 6 o'clock and on weekends, which means their lots are our lots, and are meant for our community to be parking in. One thing that's come up I've brought up in FinCom in the past is that the signs really don't let people know that this is public, that there is public parking there, there's public parking over there, there's quite a lot of public parking on weekends. And I think we do need to let the community and people outside of our community know that. Next, we do have a plan that has, I've seen, I know Michael's seen, from the planning board, to try to make the Hammett Street lot, which is really a patchwork of multiple owners, to try to work with all those owners through the guidance of the town to make it into what will appear to be a unified lot, and a lot that would be attractive for people to park into. So that it would need buy-in from all the business owners, but to have it as an advantage to them if they have the town create a unified lot. There is a plan for it, and it would bring actually many more parking spots than are presently there, because it is right now a patchwork. So I think we have plans, and I think we actually have a lot of parking. Right now we need to maximize what we have and to let people know that it exists. And then we can continue to look at other problems. And I do agree that there's an ongoing problem with the train station. I think we need to continue to figure out what's going to be the best plan, which will not have negative consequences.
Yeah, that parking lot, wow, that is quite the feat. Last night I was explaining that it's almost like if you took a vase, broke it, and the broken glass pieces, that's the ownership map of the lot. It's pretty convoluted, and Ipswich does own a portion of it, but it's mostly privately owned, and that's the biggest problem that we face, is that a lot of the downtown area is privately owned and not publicly owned. So I think it would behoove the select board to work with those owners on what can the town do to entice you to invest in, making that parking lot a more user-friendly and less eyesore for people to use. So that way it offsets the on-street parking, it offsets the congestion, what have you. But it's a multiple factors. My wife grew up in commonly known Pole Alley by the K Club, and over there it's EBSCO employees parking all over the place, and by the train station and closer to the downtown, you have people coming out of town and taking advantage of the free lot, because Ipswich is the only non-Keolis owned lot on the commuter rail line, and people in Raleigh and Essex, they know all about that. Heck, even people in Newburyport I've heard come down and use that. So it's a tough problem that we have, and as I mentioned earlier, it's a combination of things, and we really need to have public input, work with the people who already own the lots, work with the businesses like EBSCO and what have you to come to a solution to help the small businesses down here that already struggle with parking, the residents that want to take advantage of their own parking that they're paying taxes on, etc.
So there's one official question left. I'll ask it, but how do you think businesses contribute to the town? But if there's anybody in the audience with a question, would like. Well, I can repeat it.
Okay. So I'm going to kind of put you on the spot a little bit. It sounds like you guys are doing a lot of research to figure out, when you get elected, you're going to step right in. There's no training period. It's your first meeting is your first meeting. So I want to acknowledge that, it sounds like there's a lot of research done. But I also want to point out, I'm curious as to why I've actually only seen one candidate attend a select board meeting since papers were pulled. And I want to acknowledge, I know Carrie, Charlie, I think you might have been there briefly, too. But I have not seen anyone actually sit through an entire meeting, and I know it's a late night. But just curious.
I'm more than happy with that. Exhaustion. I'm on the FinCom, and it's been budget season. So it means for the last number of months, we've had 1 to 2 meetings a week, sometimes 3. and a public safety facilities meeting, and we've been meeting probably every 2 to every 4 weeks. Quite honestly, I would love to go, and there's part of me that just goes, oh, thank God I'm going to a meeting tonight. And you know, and that's not an excuse, it's just a reality. And it's, you know, I admire everybody who can get to more of the meetings, and I honestly, I can't, because I just die.
So, as the father of 2 young small children and who is already on a committee and 2 subcommittees, if I told my wife I had to go to one more additional meeting until 11 o'clock at night, we'd have some problems. But that's why we have the lovely resource of ICAM. And it is a really good resource because you're able to go after hours, after the meeting has already been had, online, look at the video in its entirety. They even sometimes break it down into different sections, which is very helpful if you're trying to target a certain issue. I also try to do my best at reading the minutes that you produce. Thank you for your work that you do. And you know, I'm in the building a lot between Finance Committee. I'm at the Utilities building a lot. So like I said, I use the resource that's at hand, and I do my best to follow along, both with the minutes and ICAM. So.
Thanks. I'll say I have been to 2 of the select board meetings plus the Bean County since I took out my papers, and I've not stopped there either because I've met with Bill Kraft, and I've met with a number of I've met with 4 former select board members and the new town manager and the planning board people and people who've been on the planning board in the past. So I feel like I want to hear from as many people about their own experiences as in the government of the town, but also their viewpoints on key issues that the town is facing. So I feel as though that is part of my job in basically applying to you all for the privilege of serving you.
That's a good question. I've been attending to zoning board meetings. Like Carrie, what I want to do is to sort of, in a way, go deeper or more directly. So that's why I've been seeking out talking to the finance director and to Glenn Gibbs. And then today I went to the DPW and talked to them to get the nitty gritty on infrastructure work. And I also signed up I went to the website and I dug around and I signed up so that I will get alerts from every committee.
As you said, I've seen you there. Sometimes I sit in the back, and I really made kind of an effort to do that. And on the ones that I haven't been able to make to, I watch them on ICAM as well. But I don't begrudge Tammy for not going. She's on the finance committee, and I've also attended the finance committee meetings.
I was impressed you stayed to 11. I think.
You stayed there till 11. Once I got to 10, I said I'm committed. But I can see why folks don't go. I mean, it's I know it's not exactly the most engaging piece, and you go through. I know you've got to sit through a lot of Phil on his citizen petitions, and we don't make it kind of accessible for people to, in terms of the notifications. I noticed, like for the select board meetings, a couple of them changed. They weren't necessarily publicized on the website, which has that calendar option, but there's like a meetings option, and it's very difficult to navigate. So even if you want to go, sometimes you can't because our digital infrastructure just isn't there. Yeah, you have to want it. You really, and I do. I think that's one of my biggest qualifications for this race is, I want to help this town, and I'm committed to the time, effort. I talked to one select board member who was saying, I said, like, what's the crux? What really can make this thing operate? And he says, when you have people who put in the time, because I heard this from another one too. It's just this is a volunteer organization, structure. So if you can't do it with 30 minutes, you can't even do it with just a meeting. A lot of these board members, a lot of the finance committee folks are putting a lot of after-hours efforts. And it's in some ways it's a math equation. The more time you put in it, the more energy you put into it, the more engagement you get out of it, the more successful we're going to be. Again, this is together, but I think we also need to look at changes. These town meetings, I brought mine to the big one for the school. I had a 1-month-old kid, and by the grace of God, he slept in his little bucket for the entire time. So I made it through the whole thing. I got to vote, and I guess that was Teddy's first town meeting. But we need to make it easier for people to know what's going to happen at these meetings, know why it's important, and allow them to participate because it's important. I mean, people, I think it was 1,500 people voted in the last town meeting. That's around 11% of the total voting pool. About a little less than 30% in the town election. You know, vastly more vote for the national elections, but I tell you, these local town ones are almost more important than the national elections in terms of what it means to your actual life. So we need to look at ways to really engage voters that haven't been coming out for these things.
Right. So, yeah, I wasn't asked, but I go to 2 or 3 meetings a week, and my week wouldn't be complete if I didn't.
I have a question.
Sure.
You've talked a lot about parking, but I see a real hole in this community is public transportation. We have the commuter rail, and we talk about parking at the commuter rail, but buses, you know, public transportation. I think our one school failed because we didn't implement a plan for public transportation to that one school. And I work with a lot of clients who, you know, are low income and have different abilities for transportation, and you know, public transportation, buses, not just for the summer to Cranes Beach, but to get to Market Basket, to Shaw's, to the schools, to the Neck, to,
So
you
the
know.
question
Is there a plan for public transportation?
sorry.
That's okay.
So yeah, that is a real issue because you can get to Ipswich, but then getting within Ipswich is the struggle. And as you mentioned, we don't have any grocery stores. So the low income, the elderly, the people that don't have transportation don't have access from where they live to get to a grocery store, what have you, and that's a struggle. The real challenge is the money. When you boil it down, it's the money. And another challenge that we have facing us are the available companies to utilize. Tammy and I were just debriefed that there is a huge struggle just in school bus attaining companies to drive kids to school. Because right now we have basically a monopoly of one company, and they control the prices. And it's difficult. And believe it or not, you know, because of the requirements to become a driver and the screening that's done and the expense of keeping up with the current licensure and everything, it's a struggle. And it's definitely something that should be looked into. It's definitely something that should be proposed because it's an issue that needs to be solved. But it's basically, it's a combination of local efforts and statewide efforts because, like I said, there's not that many options around for transportation.
Could I?
Not even to get our
I
own
wanna
students
chime
in.
Let's,
Oh,
yeah, let's keep it, yeah.
Well, actually, it's a great question. I know that if we went back to the schools, I think one of the things that was neglected, whether it was thought about or not, was a need to change our the way we transport children to school from single cars to buses. And I think that hopefully as they go forward and the school board goes forward, is to change our community in the way we think about how we transport. Because having multiple buses running is much more energy efficient. It's much better for the number of, it's just basically the number of cars on the road. It stops the traffic issue. It takes care of the traffic issues. Michael's right. We do have a problem in getting competitive bus contracts, and that is something that I know the town is working on moving forward. So we're just trying to figure that out. The other thing is that I think we do have sort of the beginning of a relationship with a Cata bus, the one that takes people from the train station down to the Cranes Beach, and that's a good beginning. And I do agree that we need to figure out ways to expand upon that. One is even, to some extent, to even get more buses here in the summertime, because we get lines of people waiting to take them. And it does have stops along the way, but we need to make sure they maximize it. Third point is the issue of getting, especially the elderly and disabled. We do have the buses that are run through our senior center. I can't remember the schedule and how often they do go to grocery stores, but it's almost like we have a good start there, and how can we take that good start and make it better? Hard part is that we live in a unique town for the state. We have 100 miles of roads in Ipswich. I believe that's more than any other town in our Commonwealth. and that's a lot of road to try to figure out how to provide appropriate transportation. So it's a great question. I think we can do better, and I think we have a beginning of it.
I have to say that perhaps my long history working in the nonprofit world makes me think, let's go to some people in town, some companies in town that have been very generous in terms of their support of programs that are beneficial to the town. I'm thinking particularly of New England Biolabs and EBSCO, and I know the Institution for Savings has done a lot of work in this area. And maybe ask them, can we look to you for some help in this area? Because they have been willing to do things. And the other piece of this puzzle is that it could really help us in terms of reducing overall emissions if it were done strategically and effectively. So there could be multiple benefits of it, and there may be some funding sources that we haven't identified just because of that piece of the puzzle. So I think it's something that we should certainly look at more and aim to achieve. Good point that you brought it up.
All right, before I explode. What springs to mind with me, and boy oh boy do I get tired of hearing the word problem. I'm more interested in hearing solution. And I'm thinking, whenever you hear, this is America, when there's a demand, there's someone wanting to fill the demand. So for Ipswich, the question is to find those who want to fill the demand. Anne holds a business roundtable. I've attended several. Anne was saying, why can't we have an electric vehicle to move people around? I think it's a brilliant idea. And I think where the demand is, there's someone to fill it. So the question is to find that one that would fill it. And I think there's probably a profit to be made. So if there's profit to be made, there's probably a solution.
When I was at the Ipswich Housing Authority, I talked to one resident whose husband who's a veteran and is disabled, and she had to kind of take off work to take care of him. And she said the big problem is for her just getting groceries. She's bumming rides off friends, and I know for a lot of our seniors that's an issue as well. And I think that's where our focus really needs to be, is on our low-income residents and our seniors. I know my grandmother, into a very old age, would be doing Council on Aging pickups, and I think a lot of people she would show up and be a little terrified this person giving her a ride. But we're also lucky in Ipswich that we have people that volunteer and are willing to do it if they're given the access and the resources, to kind of be a part of that solution. I think a lot of people that are kind of feel apart from town government don't know that they could volunteer in a program like that or participate to help somebody out. There's Meals on Wheels, all these private organizations that are doing that. The other piece is kind of the technology piece. I don't think we need kind of light rail or a vast kind of public transportation network here to invest in from a broad perspective, because I really feel like the technology is about to start changing that in profound ways. I've read the McKinsey study about that, and in addition to kind of automations in the workforce, that sort of technology piece. Although you say that to people, it's like you can't really even get an Uber here in 20 minutes, and it's going to be very expensive. So the technology will probably hit Ipswich last as it can. But in the meantime, also from a micro level, the bike sharing. I know a lot of these kind of electric scooter companies are going to kind of now popping up, but you have to be really careful about these things. About them coming to your town. There's good ways to do it, and I've seen it, and there's bad ways, like in China, where there's just hundreds of thousands of bikes just strewn around these cities with no kind of mechanisms to keep track of them and keep them off. So they're making these kind of cities dumps. So I really it's a good issue, and I'll definitely look into it more.
Yes.
So a number of you talked about doing the research, knowing what the issues are before acting. We've now joined the Municipal Vulnerability Program, and we're finishing up our year one of sorting out what some of those issues are. We just had the Metropolitan Area Planning Council do a hazard mitigation plan. We know we're in deep trouble. And I think we talked about a lot of problems here without talking about the fact that we're all really in deep trouble. And I guess my question is, and I'm talking about flooding, I'm talking sea level rise, I'm talking Jeffreys Neck Road or Gilla Road, access to the beach, the existence of the beach, deep trouble. So what do you all propose to do? And I don't mean raise roads and do bicycles. But we seriously, just like everybody else, have to cut back on our fossil fuel greenhouse gas emissions. What do you propose, not just for the town, which, you know, we're certainly working hard to get the Green Communities program adopted, but what do you propose residents do, the town does, across the board, to do our share to reduce greenhouse gases?
I think that the Green Communities piece is not a done deal yet, so I'd like for it to be a done deal, because I think we missed the boat by not being involved in it previously, and I think we should not miss the boat any longer. So I hope we will join that and become a certified community. In terms of what we can do individually, clearly reducing emissions is very high on that list. There are other things about the whole climate change picture, and I was at those workshops too, the MVP workshops, that I think, clearly let's reduce our emissions. There are other things that we should work on. I mean, I was happy to see that part of the award for the students had to do with gardening, because food production and how, for example, organic farming is a major method of carbon sequestration. We also have to really do what we can to protect our marshes, because marshes are a very important carbon sink for what's sometimes called blue carbon. And so, definitely the fact that one of our windmills isn't operating is kind of a shame, but it seems to me that we need to get it back in operation some way. We need to do what we can individually. There's all kinds of methods in terms of carbon sequestration. You're probably aware that what you eat, your food choices plays into that as well. So, definitely let's do what we can. And also, the town has had some rebate programs and some incentives, but I think that could be expanded. I've been trying to get solar panels on my roof I was rejected numerous times, and I still am waiting. I signed a contract months ago, but I'm still waiting because the town hasn't come through with its end of the deal.
Sure. Thank you. One thing I would like, you'd say Helen moved to Beverly, but I see an awful lot of solar panels on houses in Beverly. I don't see that in Ipswich, and I understand we have our own utilities department and et cetera, but I think that Ipswich could do a lot more to make it easier, obviously for Carrie and people like myself. I think we should do everything we can, honestly. And when I moved to Ipswich, I was full of enthusiasm and excitement, and I was told, gee, there's a green roof on the town hall. And I wanted to go see it, so I went out of my way to go see it, and I saw one or two weeds poking out of a gravel rooftop. I thought, holy smokes, is that it? And I think the best way to lead people is by doing. The worst way to lead people is by punishing them with bad news and doom and gloom and tickets, say. So I think the more that Ipswich can do to encourage good behavior by leadership at the town hall, et cetera, I think that's what we want to do.
I'd say from there's things from Michael level personally. I compost. I know there's the Ipswich composting program. I tried to get solar panels on my house, but my roof faces the wrong way, so it won't work out. And I eat local as I'm actually doing I finally got on the Appleton Farms farm share, so I'm doing both their meat share, their vegetable share, and their fruit share. And I've got the full share, and I promised my wife I'm gonna eat it all or blend it to food for my child. So I'm gonna be fully local this summer. But that's expensive, and not everybody can afford to eat at the Appleton farm share. And we need to make sure that it's broad based. It's not just wealthier community citizens who are engaging in these kind of green initiatives. I'm a big fan of community rainbow programs. I know Hamilton's doing one. 40% of our water waste is going to outdoor usage. It's basically one big rain, especially this April. You can fill an entire rain barrel. I'm currently still in the process of rehabbing a rain barrel, which was my Earth Week project, which is going to be my Earth Month project now, with new gutters. So I really feel like a community rain barrel program that we put together but then also it's something that we don't just put a community rainbow program out there and hope people use it. Make sure that it's being utilized by residents of all income levels and that it's easy to do. And it also saves the town water capacity. It saves us, money on your water bill for the frugal Yankees around here. And then that's a big thing on these projects. When we do these green type projects, we need oversight and accountability and follow through. Like the fact that we have a fire on that windmill that was formerly adding electricity to the grid and now is sitting hollow, and there's still some question as to whether it was bonded or not, and if the town's now going to have to take it over, and if it's cheaper to pull offline. When we go forward with these green programs, we can't just throw it out there and hope for the best. We need to make sure that we're continuing to monitor it, making sure it's effective, and making sure our investment is getting our money's worth.
So I would say that the environment is a two-sided coin, right? Because it's how do you stop the damage from continuing, and then how do you address the current damage that's been happening? And I think it's a combination of government and self-responsibility. My wife and I, we decide, like Charles, we decide to compost, we decide to recycle. The more the town can do to encourage actions like that, I think is crucial. We passed certain legislation like the plastic bag ban, that was fantastic. And we need to do more things like that on the government end, and then hope to encourage people on the personal end to do their own part. I personally don't water my lawn in the summertime. I think it's a waste. My lawn looks terrible, and it's the worst on the street, but I don't see the point in putting extra water on my lawn just to make it look good for a couple months out of the year, because the rest of the time it's covered in snow. Also, I mentioned earlier, I work for Senator Tarr, and he is a great advocate of the environment. He does a lot of work in the region when it comes to natural ways to recharge the environment. Like we've been doing studies on thin layer depositioning, which is basically the natural layering of the Great Marsh, which is one of our best resources because it's like, it's our front line of defense. It's the sponge that absorbs sea level rise, and as Carrie was mentioning, absorbs the carbon and what have you. And so it's hard to pinpoint because it's an action that has to be taken by everyone on every type of level as a whole, in order to really solve the two-sided coin problem. Stop the damage and fix the damage that's already happened. And the initiatives that we're taking on a local level to become a green community, which I think is excellent, with the environmentally friendly vehicles that the town has and what have you, I think those are types of actions that we need to do moving forward and continue to do in order to ultimately reduce our carbon footprint and not continue this destructive nature that we're in.
So everybody said good things, and I agree with everything. I think one is I don't want to dismiss the fact that, like say, the green communities. I think one of the important things about green communities is not only for us to be a participant, but then we have the ability as a community to access up to $250,000 in grants every year that can be used for doing things like replacing the single pane windows in a library, replacing inefficient boilers in our town buildings, replacing our lighting. All these things that we need to, if once we become, I think that the interest is there and the effort is there to become a green community, is then to use that. And every grant that we apply for will not only help us make capital improvements, but these capital improvements will help us decrease our energy waste. So that's one thing. Also, a town can't do it alone. We can't just have something, do a great idea. Being part of a bigger thing. Being part of a green community means all of Massachusetts is now trying to make a big difference. And as we see, Carrie mentioned about the environmental group at the high school. And I'll go back and I'll toot my daughter's horn. My daughter, Charlotte Howe, was one of the co-authors of the styrofoam ban, along with the plastic ban. They were an example of our children leading not only our town, but our Commonwealth. And as people saw in the news today, Dunkin' Donuts has decided to stop using styrofoam cups in the entire Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So I think that we need to not only be leaders in our, be leaders in our own community, but also by doing that, we become leaders in a Commonwealth and eventually in our country. I think I'm proud to have known that it was students who could lead us, but I think as select board members and as community members, I think there are ways that we can lead lead our entire community and our state.
Okay, so at the risk of getting stuck here all night, I'll take one final question if anybody.
Yeah,
Got one time.
regarding the public safety building, I've lived here for 25 years and I'm surprised that there's not one that's built yet. All the feasibility studies that are going into it, we could probably get pretty close to a down payment on a new building. My question is, what historically has stopped it, and what do you think you could do on the board to let this next one go through? And then secondly, Charlie had a question, or had a solution, creating a master plan. How do you envision this master plan, who's creating it, and how's it going to?
Yeah. I think the first, on the last public safety, what killed it was the school issue, right? They were, especially when Winthrop was considering that main site, the public safety buildings were sort of waiting on a decision on that. And the ripple effect of, spending that much time on these big one-off decisions and kind of holding off everything else until they're made is enormous, financially, personally, for a lot of the people invested in them, and also just community engagement-wise. If people don't know the master plan and they're just seeing it as a one-off, that's a big problem. And I talked to one of the select board members about that kind of, what's the plan? And one of them told me, well, it's really the budget. The town budget's kind of the plan. Well, that's a year. That's a plan for the year. It's not exactly strategic. And I talked to another one who was talking about the community development plan, but that's really kind of a vision statement, right? We have a community development plan. So this town warrant's gonna, that we'll be voting on, I'm sure you'll be there if you're here tonight. We'll probably see you there. I hope you'll vote for it. It tasks the select board with really taking the main lead role in that sort of strategic engagement process, working across the committees to sort of move forward in our big projects. And I've been, as part of the Baker administration, I've been a part of a lot of strategic plans. And I've been really impressed how the administration, they don't just hope that, each little silo does things well. They have a system for accountability and developing a master plan, and then also attacking, the milestones are, in addition to kind of what we want to do, but how we're going to get there. And then also monitoring how well we're doing on getting there. I've got some issues with the community development plan on the timelines from the, I think it's not until next fall will they be issuing some sort of thing. And again, I put that more in line in the vision statement. I don't think we need to wait. I think we know what we need to do in this town. And whether it's our infrastructure stuff with the water and the $100 million in water and electric, it's kind of just thrown out there, and we really need to get, and I keep asking for, what's the list? Give me the top 10 things on infrastructure, the top 10 things on electric, the stabilization plans for the schools, because we can't have kids. I'm sorry. And more time to talk about the kids.
Well, all of what he says, but again, when listening to your question again, it does, to me, raises the point of the skepticism that each problem is met with sort of a stepping back and a skepticism about any solution rather than moving forward. And I think that's what all of us have in common, is we all want to move forward. So, and again, I think there's we have a history of missed opportunities. There's buildings that have become available that might have been suitable, that then went on to be developed into like condominiums or things like that. So,
I guess it's not uncommon for things to get kicked down the road, and it's a sense of how urgent something is. I do feel as though we should be wary of a mindset that is calling for austerity funding of our town government, which I just say that sometimes people who are arguing for austerity are more vocal and louder, heard more. So I think we have to be a little bit careful about making sure that the things that are our true needs are funded. Is it okay if I throw in a word here about water? Do you mind? I just feel like there's something that needs to be said. The proposal that we're looking at now for a new well in the Bullbrook Subbasin, the Bullbrook Subbasin is already at the level of severe degradation based on the amount of water being taken from it. There's a state standard, and Basically, we're already way beyond the severe degradation stage, and we're proposing to put another well in that same subbasin. To me, that's not only a mistake, but it's a waste of public money. To put a well in something, it would be very vulnerable in the future, and it would also have the potential to adversely impact other withdrawals such as Marini's Farm. So I think that, you know, looking at some of these financial things, we do have to look at all of them and see what are the most urgent priorities.
Scott, I think that's great questions. And I think we have, one is the government study committee is recommending that the select board be charged with setting up a plan, a capital plan, a capital expenditure plan. How do we look forward? I think that we can't pit one project against another. I think that all the projects are of importance, and we need to figure out how to afford them going forward, and not just keep, as one says, kick the can down the road, because by doing that, all we've done is making things much more expensive in the future, or leading us to problems with catastrophic damage. So something big happens because we haven't fixed things along the way. I think regarding like why has public safety facilities building failed in the past, I think it's become a divisive topic where it was either you were for the police or you were for the fire department or you didn't care. And I think one of the things that we've made really important, I think is very important in putting this building forward as a proposal together, is that it's a community building. And it's not just the police building, it's not just the fire department's building, but it's the entire community. It will be a place where it'll be a place where all of us can use it. And I think that by finding what is important to the entire community, that is what's going to have a building pass. And I think that's why projects fails, because we can't figure out, sometimes we don't get enough buy-in from our community to say what is important to you and what do you want and what do you need. I do think that we have, in all of our plans, we need to think carefully about spending money, but that doesn't mean not spending money. It means thinking about how we work with our finance directors to know what is the impact of spending money now and what will happen in 20 years if we don't. So we need to be careful, but we need to plan, but we need to not just say we don't spend money. We need to be smart and spend the money so we don't end up spending much more in the future.
The biggest reason why public safety buildings have failed in the past, land ownership and response time. As I mentioned earlier, Ipswich owns, comparatively speaking to neighboring communities and especially cities, Ipswich owns very little land in the downtown. And the land that Ipswich does own is too far out of the response time zones for the fire department, which are under very strict rules that they have to be in a certain distance within downtown and within the corners of the town. And, you know, as Helen mentioned, there has been missed opportunities. I think the town missed an opportunity years ago. This was before my time, unfortunately, where CVS is, which was formerly Rite Aid, which was formerly Brooks, was for sale. That would have been a great parcel for the land for the town to purchase. It's right downtown. It's within those response times, and that would have been great. And hopefully, moving forward, we won't have so much oversight issues and seeing the in-depth value of those types of opportunities come up. And when it comes to your point about the master plan, so you know it's really a community effort, because the subcommittees are charged with going through each specific problem. The finance committee, select board are responsible for finding out the finances behind it, and then the community is the one that puts the priority on it, knowing all the facts. And that's why we have over 50 subcommittees and steering committees and what have you, and that's why we have you know, all the people involved as we do, because it has to be a community effort on what is being prioritized here, along with a combination of the actual facts behind it and what we have left for life in each of these projects. Unfortunately, a lot of them, we don't have a lot of life left, and that's the biggest problem we face. And one of the biggest problems that we're going to have as a board is deciding on how to fund those, because they're between the utilities, the roads, the public safety, the schools. You're talking hundreds of millions of dollars that have to be paid, and it's all going to be put on the taxpayers' back. So that's the biggest problem we have, but hopefully we'll come to a solution collaboratively.
Thank you. Does your short question have a short answer?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Curious how how many, and this isn't a fair question to ask with Michael and Tammy, how many of you have had a chance to go through the proposed FY20 budget?
30 seconds.
Why don't we just have those three?
Yeah, I know.
Another person who I went out of my way to talk with is Sarah Johnson, at the finance director. I spent over 2 hours talking with her about the town budget. And I was very heartened to hear her with a great deal of pride, express that Ipswich is in good shape.
I haven't read through the town budget as of yet, but now you said I'll do so. I've attended the finance committees and gotten a lot of information on it. I think it was kind of eye-opening. Some departments are doing great. I actually liked the presentation from the water department at the select board meeting recently. Some departments I wasn't as impressed with in terms of their numbers together. I know at the finance committee you guys had a lot of issues on not all the numbers being provided the time that they're supposed to be, and some of them at the public works department it seemed very generic. And I think as a select, having executed on lots of large budgets and gone through strategic planning projects, which in some ways strategy is about resource allocation. It's an absolutely vital document, but not just for the year. We need these things, to kind of project out. And we also need processes across the departments that get to that strategic plan.
Turning into a long answer.
Oh, that's right. Forgot this wasn't a 2-minute. Yeah.
I'll just say I did go to bean counting, and I feel as though clearly we have a lot of people who are really working hard to ensure that the funding that we need is going to be provided. So that part was worthwhile, I would say.
Thank you. So I think we'll leave it there. We've 6 candidates for the select board. David Wallace is ill and couldn't make it here tonight. So I'd like to thank all of the candidates for showing up. Thank you for that.
And to Ree for putting in the sound system and filming this entire time.
The sound system came from Linda Ayala and Hearts and Flowers. She's a member of the Ipswich Business Roundtable, and she was kind enough to come this afternoon and set it up for us.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
And Ree is doing a Facebook Live presentation, hopefully, on our Ipswich Business Roundtable.
Your arms must be so tired. I'm
Very
impressed.
It's all that furniture moving.
That's right.
Okay. Well, thanks again. The election is May 21st, so there's your selection.
Thank you very much.